Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Ice Cream for PRs podcast. My name is Jeff Nippard, and joining me this week, I have Menno Henselmans on the line. How are you doing, Menno?
Great, you?
Oh, I'm good, man. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing all of your knowledge with us. I've been pretty excited to talk to you now for a while. So in case there's anyone listening who isn't familiar with Menno, why don't you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about who you are and your training and academic background.
Sure, yeah. First, I'd like to say that I think it's awesome that you want to talk to me because mostly when, we'll talk about training frequency and we'll go into that. But you said that you had basically watched my videos and said, hey, that's some stuff that I had never heard before, and I'd like to talk to you about that. And I think that's awesome because you see so many people in the industry. They have their own little biased view, their dogma, and regardless of whether it's right or wrong, they'll never change it.
Yeah.
So, I think it's great. As for introducing myself, I'll give you the quick rundown.
Yeah.
Basically, I started as a business consultant specialized in advanced statistical data analysis. And I realized that was the career path that was expected of me, but it wasn't really my passion. I'd always been passionate about sports, doing basically every kind of sport that was available in my local community. And that translated into starting strength training. I really liked that. And I sort of stuck with that. And at some point, I think the last sport I did was volleyball, and the team broke up for some reason. And we were doing pretty intense strength training for that, and I stuck with that, and that basically led to my passion for fitness and strength training, website, writing for T Nation, and now I have my own PT course, which is like a certification institute for personal trainers, research team, where we're going to publish a lot of scientific papers, and we'll published a few already. I do online coaching, that's basically my full-time gig, and still write a lot of articles for both my own website, BeijingBodybuilding.com, and various other websites. And that's where I am now.
Cool. Great, man. So where are you from? Like, where are you living right now? Because are you in Ecuador or, tell us a little bit about
I'm now in Ecuador. By the time you post this, I will probably not be in Ecuador anymore, or at least not in the same city.
Right.
I grew up in the Netherlands. Studied in the United Kingdom and an international college in the Netherlands before that, and now I just travel basically because my job, what I do, online coaching, writing papers, publishing articles, that kind of stuff, I can do all of that online. So what I need is a good internet connection, and you'd actually be surprised how much of the world that excludes. But all I need is good internet connection. So right now I'm in Ecuador. I've lived in Belize, United Kingdom, Spain, Mexico, obviously the Netherlands, Uruguay, been to Argentina recently.
Wow.
Now living in Ecuador, and next up is Brazil.
Wow, that's awesome, man. And I think your story is a really interesting one I can relate to because, I had a career change myself. I was on a path to be a dentist. So I was accepted into dental school right out of the gate, and decided similarly to you that I wanted to pursue what I was really passionate about. So I switched gears, and I guess we're doing similar things. But my academic background, I think, might not be quite as intricate as yours. So you have a master's. Is that related to exercise science and physiology, or is it a different field?
Not at all. Basically, my bachelor is in social sciences.
Okay.
You could say it's economics and statistics. I went to the International Honors College of Utrecht University, and that's a liberal arts and sciences program, so you sort of create your own curriculum. But I focused on economics and statistics and some behavioral psychology. Then I went to the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom, and there I did basically behavioral science, behavioral economics, the field is technically called. You can think of that as a combination between statistics, economics, and behavioral psychology as well. And the reason I have the statistics background that I have is that our teachers were well, basically aware of the fact that people that study behavioral economics only end up either in academia or unemployed. So my background was really, really science oriented and very heavy on the statistics and scientific methodology. And I'm really, really thankful for that because, well, now I can actually use it and apply it to exercise science and nutrition. So I'm not, I don't have any regrets at all that I didn't study nutrition or anything, because most nutrition and exercise science institutes, they're just not that good.
Yeah.
So, Harvard doesn't teach exercise science.
Interesting. I didn't
fortunately.
know that. Yeah. No, I think that that's great, and I would definitely view you as one of the statistic wizards within the niche of a niche that we have here. So, I'm sure that that's benefited your career greatly. So, Menno, let's dive right into the training frequency stuff. So we might disagree a little bit here, but hopefully we can find some common ground so we can have a good conversation. So how often should we train a given muscle group?
Right. I'd say that primarily depends on how advanced you are. If you are a beginner, then most research shows that there is actually no benefit to training a muscle group more than once a week, provided that training volume across the week is equated between groups. So your traditional, what I call a bro split, basically, hitting each body part once a week, that works very well for beginners. But as you get more advanced, the anabolic window, basically, which is the time course that you can elevate muscle protein balance further than if you were sedentary. So your body basically allows a higher ceiling of muscle protein synthesis, which allows you to build new muscle. And that period basically decreases as you get more advanced. The closer you approach your genetic limitations, the more narrow the window of adaptation becomes. So you can get around that a little bit by increasing volume or intensity, but what research shows is that it is very unlikely to make up fully for sticking to a training frequency of once a week in more advanced lifters.
Right. I've actually heard I don't know if you're familiar with Ripeto's work, practical programming and
yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I feel as though he says that the strength recovery adaptation cycle for a beginner would actually be much shorter. So he makes exactly the opposite argument that beginners should, hit the big 3 Monday and then again on Wednesday and then again on Friday, kind of thing, as long as they can take advantage of that kind of linear progression. What would you have to say to someone who would say that? I'm not sure I actually disagree with you, but that would be if I were to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah. It's a really good question. Basically, while I greatly admire Ripeto and his work, he's not a very science-based guy, self-proclaimed non-science-based guy. Right. So, logically it would be plausible what he says, but research simply shows that it isn't true. So the repeated bout effect, for example, in particular, is very well documented, and it shows that as you get more advanced, you get used to certain exercises, then you recover faster from them. And mostly it's not even that your rate of recovery is that different, but the damage you do is greatly reduced. So you simply don't inflict the same amount of muscle damage as a beginner does, who is clumsier and basically is still very good at damaging his own body or her own body very significantly. As you get more advanced, you go very resistant to muscle damage. The body also regulates its own fatigue, what people call central fatigue, which is it exists, but it's kind of it's often taken out of context, and your body regulates that quite well. And what you see in the research, Truls Rastad, for example, I think it's a Norwegian, pretty sure he's a Norwegian researcher, is probably the world's most renowned expert on the recovery process after strength training, and he has done a ton of research on it, which shows that the more advanced you get, given the same kind of training, the quicker you recover from it.
Mm. Yeah, indeed. So how about we assume that most people are listening are probably at least intermediate or advanced for the rest of the course of the discussion. So for an advanced level lifter, about how many times are you looking at hitting a given muscle group per week?
I think the consensus in evidence-based fitness is about twice a week. I would say that, well, intermediate is a broad realm, but I would err more towards 3 or even more frequent sessions than that for most intermediate lifters, because we have quite a lot of study. I think we have 3 good studies that show the superiority of 3 sessions for a body part versus 1. So it's the same total training frequency, same total training volume, but the frequency per muscle group is 3 versus 1. I think we have 3 studies on that. And when you go up to higher ranges, then the literature becomes more scarce, but we have a few really cool ones. I think there was a military study or a study on military personnel. I think Hecke is the main author. And he compared 3 versus 9 sessions. And the 9-session group, it didn't reach statistical significance, but they had a lot of, they basically on every measure, it was a combined training program, aerobic and anaerobic. I think they had, the difference was that the 9-session group lost fat and actually gained some muscle mass. And the reverse was basically true for the 3-session group. More relevantly is the Norwegian Frequency Project, which is one of the most awesome studies out there. They basically took the Norwegian national powerlifting team, which is a really, really strong force in the powerlifting world, and they put them on the exact same program. The only difference was that the high frequency group did 6 sessions for each body part, and the low frequency group did 3 sessions. So that's 3 versus 6, which is really on the higher end of what most people would already recommend. And there were pretty clear benefits for the 6-day group. Basically, you saw that the 3-day group made the progress that you'd expect from elite level powerlifters, which is very little.
Yeah.
And the 6-day group made really good progress. Many lifters saw like 20% increases in strength over the course of that study, which was 8 or 12 weeks, I think. And they originally didn't want to publish that because they wanted to keep it a secret, because and especially at the time, it was quite revolutionary. But it sort of went viral. And now I know that they are trying to get it published.
Yeah.
Or it's actually already under review based on the last thing I heard, because most people already heard of it.
Right. So yeah, that's one that I haven't read, but I'd be curious to hear more about. So do you have access to the paper personally, or has it been kind of through the grapevine that you've heard about it?
I have pretty good contacts in Norway.
Okay, I figured.
Yeah.
That's why I contacted you.
Yeah, I've seen the actual programs.
Yeah.
And the Norwegians used a percentage system, so they actually specify with very elaborate periodization models. You are going to do, box squats at 70% of your max. First set you're going to do 5 reps. Second set you're going to do 8 reps. Then you're going to do 3 reps at 80%, for example. They specified all of that exactly. So training volume was exactly the same between groups. The only difference was that the frequency per body part was 3 versus 6 sessions.
Yeah. I don't know if you would have access to this information, but how important would the role of drugs be in this? So if they're using, performance enhancing drugs, then it might seem more plausible that the 6 times per week group would have superior results.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there is no literature on the effect of androgenic anabolic steroids on the optimal training frequency. You could actually argue it either way. On the one hand, drugs increase your work capacity, making you capable of tolerating a higher frequency, which might then be able to elicit further gains. On the other hand, they basically increase the distance from your genetic limitations. So an advanced individual that starts taking drugs is now really no longer an advanced individual, because relative to that person's genetic limitations, these have now shifted. So that person is now actually an intermediate, which would argue the opposite, that your optimal training frequency needs to decrease. And that's also what you actually see as a trend in more professional bodybuilders. In Arnold's era, and especially before that, really before the steroid era, almost all the top bodybuilders did full body programs with quite high frequencies, like training each body part 3 times a week was very common up until about Arnold. And it was about Arnold's period that this shifted and drug use became a lot more prevalent. And now once training each body part once a week is more common, and you have guys like Big Ramy that say that they don't need to, they don't train certain body parts more than once every 2 weeks, otherwise they get too big. That's what we call a luxury problem. But more relevantly here about the Frequency Project is that if there is one powerlifting team in the world where I believe that the natural powerlifting team is really natural, it's Norway. These guys are really, really anti-drug, and they made a huge shift. I think up until 5, maybe 10 years ago, performance-enhancing drugs were actually legal in Norway. That changed, and there were a lot of lawsuits, and the government began a really radical policy and propaganda against drugs. And I can see the effects both in Norway and in my clients. I actually have a question in my intake form for every client where I ask, are you going to use any drugs? Because I take on clients that use drugs. I think that's a decision that every person should be able to make for him or herself. That's not up to me as a coach. I'm just going to ask them if they are going to use it, and then I will take this into account. But in Norway, most people just say no. A lot of people say, what are PEDs? Because I just say PEDs. I don't want to attract too much attention to it for people that don't know, So a lot of people say, what are PEDs? The Norwegians, pretty much without exception, they say something like never have, never will. So nobody just says no. They're really violently against drug use. A lot of lawsuits. They test people in the middle of the night. Like they knock on your door in the middle of the night and like, urine test now or you're disqualified. They're really, really strict on it. So I really think that these guys are actually natural.
Right. Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I think that increases the weight, I guess I would put in that study in that case.
I think when the full text is published, they will probably say what kind of testing they did.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. The next comment I would have on that would be how well do you think the measures or the outcomes in terms of strength would correlate with hypertrophy outcomes, or did they measure hypertrophy outcomes?
Yeah, they also measured hypertrophy. I think they measured the vastus lateralis, so the quads basically. I think it didn't reach statistical significance, but the p-value was 0.06, I think, which is 1% away from significance, and almost everyone, but almost everyone would call it like a strong trend.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, and you see in the data, I think Birgit Fagerli, Norwegian strength coach, a really great guy to follow. He wrote an article, I think, reignite your progress with new science or something on Elite FTS, and there he shows the actual data plots from the Norwegian Frequency Project, if they're still there, because I know some sites published it and they had the data taken away.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But I think it's still on Elite.
Maybe I'll get you to send that one to me after, and I can link it in the description or in the show notes or whatever for people to go and read.
Sure.
So let's talk about the effect of volume on frequency, because one of the arguments that I typically hear for increasing frequency is that it allows for you to squeeze in a greater amount of volume throughout the training week. So, I mean, that's kind of straightforward. I think everyone would probably agree that if you can increase the weekly volume, then that's going to have positive effects on hypertrophy, right?
Yeah, up to a point, of course.
Up to a point, yeah. So let's just say then we equate the weekly training volume. Are you still convinced that there's some volume independent effect of increasing frequency on hypertrophy, especially in, say, let's just assume it's just advanced trainees?
Yeah, definitely, because I think literally, I'm pretty sure every study that's been done on training frequency and advanced lifters equated training volume between groups. And as you say, in practice, that is never the case, because if you normally do incline bench press, decline bench press, normal bench press, and flies on the same day, and in a higher frequency setup, you split all that out over the group or over the week, then you'll find that on every exercise other than the first, basically, you'll be stronger if you do a higher training frequency. So even given the same number of sets, given the same exercises, your total volume will be higher because you are less fatigued every time you are doing your chest exercises.
Right.
So I think that's actually that's why the literature understates the benefits of higher training frequencies. But it is true that a lot of people, when they hear, for example, that some of my advanced clients, they train each body part once a day even, so it's a daily, they hit each body part every day. And then what they do is, first of all, they are not advanced. And second of all, they basically take their program and just increase the number of training days with the same volume. And then they get injured or they just severely overdo it on training volume. And then they're like, this is not doable, this is inhuman. So it's quite important to still take weekly training volume into account. You don't want to increase the frequency and the volume in the same proportion, because then you'll greatly overdo it on the volume.
Right. I guess to that point, I would have to say, like, I've seen it in myself and in some other people that it kind of takes a while to get going. So just running with your example, say you did flat bench press for 3 or 4 sets, incline dumbbell press or whatever it was for 3 or 4 sets, and then flies for 3 or 4 sets. If I were to just come in and just do flies, like I would just almost feel like in that specific session, I wouldn't be warmed up enough, or I wouldn't feel enough stimulation to feel as though I had, sufficiently stimulated the muscle. So I would have to bring up, where is that balance between per volume or per session training volume and then total weekly training volume? Because like if you just imagine, say, doing a straight 5x5 on squats, splitting that up into 5 separate days where you just do 1 set of 5 is going to generate a different amount of fatigue and sort of type of stimulation than doing all 5 in one day. So like there has to be some balance between that, right?
Yeah, that's funny, because a few years ago, basically Birger Fagerli, the guy that just talked to you about, he basically convinced me of the benefits of higher training frequencies based on what he saw in his clients. And then I started doing this. Before that, I actually had the exact same position as you have, that there needs to be some kind of minimal training stimulus per session.
Yeah.
But that minimal volume seems to be quite low. It's probably, if you look at the research, you can actually, even in trained lifters, with just 30% of your max, you can already very significantly increase muscle protein synthesis rates. So you can basically open that anabolic window, the adaptation progress, you can start it with just one hard set at 30%. So it appears that the body is actually quite sensitive to the stress of resistance training, and it doesn't have this threshold that you may expect that becomes very resistant to building more muscle mass. It's quite adaptive. Muscle tissue is, as researchers call it, it's very plastic compared to, say, bone, which can adapt actually, but not nearly as much as muscle tissue.
Right.
And as for the warming up, I think that's mainly something you just have to get used to. If you do multiple exercises for the same body part, you get like the tendency to use the exercises, especially if you use something like a pyramiding scheme. The exercises themselves are your warm-up, but you'll need to do more actual warming up if you do something like full body training. So, but you will notice that after something like Romanian deadlifts, a few sets, you will be warmed up. So your chest may not be super warm, but you do one set at 70% or something, then you'll probably already reach max performance levels. I think there was actually a Brazilian study not too long ago that showed that for the bench press at 70%, an all-out set, there was actually no effect of warming up. So it may decrease your risk of injury or something like that, but performance was actually the same. So suggesting that it's warming up is mostly just the feeling. The major caveat I would add is that research was done in Brazil, and I have lived in Mexico and Belize, and by the time I arrive in the gym there, I am already soaking wet.
Yeah.
So, that's quite a difference from when I'm training in Norway and I need to wear a sweater to the gym and I need to keep my sweater on the first 20 minutes before I actually start sweating.
Right.
So that's very important to take into account there.
Yeah. So to that point, which I of course think is a good one, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, say, preferentially placing the majority or the bulk of the training volume, say of your chest and delt training volume, on one day, where you go in and you take advantage of those, we'll call them like warm up sets or exercises or whatever, and then take advantage of the increased per session volume. And then on the other day, say a back day or a leg day or whatever, you throw in this 30% minimal threshold that you talked about, so that you can take advantage of some increased frequency while still getting, a pretty good hit of per session volume earlier in the week. So that's actually the way I've structured my current training program. So I'll have one day where I do chest and shoulders, and then another day where I do arms. But on top of the arm work, I also throw in close grip bench press. And people who have kind of said, well, close grip bench press, like that's not really going to be enough chest and delt work to really, stimulate much of anything. And it sounds like, based on what you just said, that might actually be sufficient. But then again, I guess you would probably say, rather than chunk it all on one day, you should space that out across 3 or 4 or 5 sessions instead.
I think that setup could work very well, and I always with frequency and volume, you are looking at a range usually. So for training frequency, like in the untrained individuals, I mean, there doesn't at least seem to be any downside, although I wouldn't recommend it to training each body part every day as a beginner even. At least not in research. As I say, I wouldn't recommend it. But I think that if you have a setup like what you said, which is more of one big bolus volume followed by multiple pulses of lower volume, compared to equating that volume over more evenly distributed pulses over the week, you could definitely get the same kind of effects. And I think that the researcher I mentioned, Troels Rastad, and a few others that have done a lot of research on blood flow restriction training, they use a similar kind of approach. Basically, they use the blood flow restriction training, which does very little muscle damage and causes relatively little fatigue compared to high-intensity strength training. They use that kind of training over other sessions to basically supplement a more traditional type program, resulting in still a very high training frequency. That sounds like basically what you're saying, and they have good results with that. I think you could get the same kind of result as distributing it more equally.
Cool. I'm super curious, and you don't have to go into the details here if you don't want to, if you're like the Norwegians and you don't want to share your secrets, but how would you structure, so you mentioned a 5-day-a-week training or maybe 7-day-a-week, I don't know, training program where you have your advanced athletes hitting a given muscle group every single day. How would that work? Like, would you start with, say, squats or a leg movement on one day, and then the next day you would start with a back, and then the next day you would start with a chest or something like that? Or would it just be the same exact routine every day? Or would it just be one exercise per body part? Just maybe give us a little bit of detail as to how you would organize that, because I would imagine some of our listeners might want to try that out.
Sure, yeah. I'll take this back to the intermediate lifter, because as you said, most of the audience probably falls into that category. Yeah. A setup I really like there is having, which is actually kind of similar to what you just described, having one kind really heavier day, or at least a lot more fatiguing day, followed by a lighter kind of day, followed by an off day, which would mean that the frequency is 2 out of 3 days for each body part. And how that looks, it depends on the type of setup you're doing. But you'd, for example, have heavy bench presses, kind of strength-oriented, lower reps on day A. And on day B, you have, for example, something like more high repetition flies. And day C is rest day for chest. But on day C, you are working hamstrings and back, for example, doing Romanian deadlifts heavy. And on day D, you would have, for example, lag curls, higher volume, et cetera, so that for each muscle group, it shifts over the whole week in that 2 out of 3 day setup. So that's an example of how that could look.
Right. And then in more highly advanced guys, I think you said you might bump it up even more, or is that as high as you tend to go?
No, it definitely. Then I think there's one study on female athletes, like highly advanced lifters, showing benefits of even twice a day training compared to once a day. And I think there's one more study showing some benefits of twice a day training compared to one session a day. Not sure. Just a sec. Yeah. Oh, my girlfriend. What was I saying? Training frequency. Oh, yes, in advanced lifters.
Yeah, so the advanced, yeah.
How it would look. If someone is more advanced, you would have a setup where you're basically doing full body every day, assuming 7 training sessions a week, every body part once a week. That's a setup that can work well for advanced trainees. What I originally tried doing here is just increasing the frequency so that you'd have, for example, only an A and a B session, like typical full body kind of setup, and you just rotate it really, really fast. And I found that works great for people with muscle memory, people on steroids, but that is a surefire way to completely blow out your recovery rates and get injured for many people. So usually what you end up doing is having a lot more variety for the advanced trainees. So you'd have 3 or 4 different days is probably what I'd mostly use. And each day is a completely different kind of day. But they are all technically full body sessions.
Right.
So, and within those days, like in the example of the intermediate, you might have bench press and fly, rest, and the advanced trainee might have dumbbell bench press, push-ups, flies, and you then also alternate rep targets. You might have more exercise variety. So you get a lot more variety for the advanced trainee. But the frequency per body part is daily.
Right. So you're looking at about 1 exercise per body part per day.
Yeah.
About
1 or 2 is usually as high as you want to go because, well, first of all, just session length will be a constraint.
Yeah.
And total weekly training volume will go up really, really fast.
Right. And then sets per exercise, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, it varies dramatically, I'd say, because optimal training volume varies dramatically. Females can generally tolerate much more, also a higher training frequency. I have an article on that. Probably don't want to get into too much detail now. I think it's called 9 Reasons Women Should Not Train Like Men on my blog. But yeah, I'd say it varies all the way between 1 and something like 8 sets. I think on the highest I've gone is with Nina Ross, that got her IFBB Pro card on that program. And she did 8 sets per muscle group per day, divided over 2 sessions. So she trained twice a day with a volume of 8 sets per day every day for each muscle group.
Wow.
She has like the perfect profile for that because she has good genetics. She's a woman. She has like a very low stress life. She's a very chill out person. And it's her job to do this. So she can devote all her time to it. She can sleep well every day. Her nutrition is dialed in. She has sponsors that basically make her meals and that kind of stuff. So
she's living the life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, Menno. Thank you for sharing that. So I'd like to come back around to the research quickly and have you comment on what I've been calling the novelty effect that we see in training frequency studies. So for anyone who's not familiar with that, essentially most people just run bro splits or body part splits. There was a survey done, and I think some ridiculous percentage of bodybuilders were doing bro splits. It might have actually even been 100% in the survey. So when you do these studies, people are typically running bro splits at the beginning of the study. Then you split them up into 2 groups where you have one group run, say, an upper lower or a full body or whatever it might be. And then you have the other group continue running something that they've kind of already been running, or at least something very similar to it. So I think the case could be made that maybe it's not the frequency per se that's causing the better adaptations in the upper lower group or the full body group, but the fact that they're doing something that's novel, something new that they haven't done before. So what would you have to say about that?
I think that will definitely occur for strength because Basically, when you are adapting to strength training, the adaptation of strength is the sum of morphological, usually just muscle hypertrophy, and neurological adaptations. Basically, your nervous system learning how to control your body to perform that given movement. And what you see is that the adaptations of muscle hypertrophy are somewhat linear over time, over your whole training career. And of course, diminishing as you get more advanced. But within a certain program, which is like a few weeks, they are roughly linear. Neural adaptations, however, are not linear at all. They are very exponentially diminishing. You could model them with a logarithmic kind of curve. So they rise very quickly, and then they quickly diminish as your nervous system is even more plastic than muscle tissue. So, and this is, I think, also how many coaches actually fake progress in their clients. They basically just change everything up like every 4 weeks or so. And then they are always making great progress because they are always a newbie at what they are doing. So it seems as if they are always making great progress. And a lot of trainees also basically suffer from this. They reevaluate their progress in a year, look at the mirror, take progress photos, and they see, I haven't really made any progress at all. And I've been there years on end as an intermediate before I figured out basically how to get to a more advanced level. But there are basically two things in the research, two phenomena that describe the novelty effect. These are muscle confusion, which I actually call muscle confusion, because the idea is that you should change things up completely some people even say every session, to prevent the body from adapting. But the whole point of a training session is that you get the body to adapt. Adaptation is the goal, because muscle hypertrophy is the adaptation, assuming you're a bodybuilder. Yeah. So that just is just based on an anonymous interpretation of the whole adaptation process. The other thing, which is a lot more scientific, is basically block periodization. That you'd have, for example, a high frequency training block followed by a lower training frequency block. However, if you look at the literature, block periodization actually does not have a great track record at all. It's quite suitable for athletes, especially mixed athletes, when you have to combine strength, power, endurance, and just overall mass training. So when you are balancing all these different kind of adaptations, then there might be a lot of merit to block periodization. I'm not an expert on that. I wouldn't be able to tell you if I would train an athlete like that, because I don't train mixed athletes, other than just get them jacked and have their other coach do the sport-specific training.
Yeah.
But what most research shows is that block periodization does not fare better than just a completely continuous program. And a recent study actually showed that undulating periodization was superior to block periodization for both strength and muscle hypertrophy, I think. So, and I also see this in my own clients, like many of my clients that are with me for months or like even 2 years. It's very rare that someone stays with me for more than 2 full years, probably just because of the financial constraints. And I see that progress is quite linear over time. You see that, you see the diminishing effect of what you'd expect in an advanced trainee. But I think one of the central tenets of my kind of programs is that it's more of a system that adapts specifically based on your progress than, than block periodization, for example, where you'd have a completely different kind of program every 4 weeks or at some other completely arbitrary time interval. And I don't see this at all, basically, any benefits of changing up the program, because some clients just want it. They say, I'm just really bored with this program. I just need something new psychologically. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. And I don't see better progress there at all. And I also don't see it in, depending on the type of background someone has, for example, because I got clients like that come from traditional pro bodybuilding backgrounds, from the functional crowd, and now have quite a big audience, since I'm speaking at Paleo FX, from that kind of crowd, like the low carb, more functional training and CrossFit crowd. I think the kind of training that you were doing before has actually very little impact on what's optimal. What matters is basically primarily how advanced you are in relation to your genetic capacity. And that determines the optimal program parameters like volume, frequency, intensity, all that stuff.
So yeah, I'll touch on a couple things that you said there.
Sure.
So in terms of block periodization, like this is something that I have read on quite extensively and have implemented with some of my athletes, and that's because, well, I'm a power lifter and a bodybuilder, so I tend to compete in powerlifting in my off season. So I guess you could call that a mixed athlete of sorts. So I think, yeah, a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Are you being sarcastic, or it is actually like not?
No, it's. I'd say that they're not nearly as dissimilar as most people would have you believe. That there's strength and size are like these completely different things, and powerlifters are these really scrawny guys. They're just fat. And they're really strong, but they don't have a lot of muscle mass at all. And bodybuilders are like huge and jacked, and they're really frail and weak. Actually, right. I think that's complete baloney. So up until the steroid era, basically, you'd actually saw that all the bodybuilders were powerlifters, and vice versa. And also in research, you see like enormously high correlations. Actually, I have an article right now on PaleoFX that just came out today, I think. Where I basically make the claim that indeed powerlifters should train a lot more like bodybuilders. And I think Greg Knuckles, who's a really elite level powerlifter, also a very evidence-based guy, basically also says that. So those are things you can check out on that. But we're going off topic.
I would agree. I think that a powerlifter in his or her off season should train more like a bodybuilder with more exercise variation, more rep range variation, and so on. Lower intensities, perhaps. But I think that leading into a competition, it's important to acclimate yourself to heavier loads and so on. So, I mean, I don't know if strictly speaking it would qualify as block periodization, but I'll have blocks where I'll focus on peaking for a specific powerlifting event, and then blocks where I'm training more in a bodybuilding style with, say, somewhat of a powerlifting focus. At least the big three are in there at more higher frequencies. And then other blocks when I'm, say, in the off season of both, where I'm just, doing something like I would have done for the last couple of months, which was kind of like a modification on a body part split or a bro split. So in that sense, I think block periodization would be beneficial.
For sure.
But I think that for perhaps a strict bodybuilder, I actually wouldn't be surprised at all if a just straight linear approach didn't have the same or greater benefit than a block periodized approach, which I think is what you were saying.
Yeah, basically. And, I do the exact same thing you do when it comes to powerlifting. I also got some powerlifting clients, and what you just described is basically exactly what I do. The closer you get to your competition, the more specific the training becomes for the competition.
And then I guess I feel as though I put more weight on the psychological effects than maybe you do. I kind of take my client's word at face value when they say they're bored with the program, and I send them a new one rather than keep them on the same split. And I find the same thing for myself. Like I've been training for 10 years, and I'll still, if I stay with the exact same routine for longer than, 3 or 4 months, then I'm ready to switch something up. And I do think that this is supported by the research on periodization. I'm not sure. There was a video that Greg Knuckles, you just mentioned him, he put out around the same time that I put out my video, sort of defending bro splits or whatever. And he referenced a paper there by a guy named John Kiley, and it's just a review of all of the papers that we have on periodization. And he sort of notes that one of the common themes amongst those studies is that changing up the training stimulus in some fashion tends to lead to new or at least stronger adaptations. So I think that the case can be made for having periodic alterations in the training frequencies. I would think that once a week is like pushing it a little far. Like I think we have pretty conclusive evidence that at least hitting everything, at the worst, hitting everything in the way that I described earlier, where you have, say, most of the volume bolused in one workout and then one more workout where, say, you do one exercise or something, would be the lowest end of the range. But then, say, you periodize in another couple of months of training where you're doing something more similar to what you described, say 4 or 5 times a week hitting a body part. I just feel as though if not from a physiological standpoint, then at least from a psychological standpoint, that would be more beneficial than just continuously running the 4 to 5 times per week training frequency.
Yeah, sure. I would know that. I'm not saying you shouldn't change the program at all.
Right.
You definitely should. It should change systematically as you get more advanced. For example, increasing the training frequency, increasing volume. And it should also change based on your progress. I mean, if you are, at some point, you will get stuck on any kind of program you do. Otherwise, everyone could get jacked just being consistent.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. And then it needs to change, definitely. When you are doing a program that isn't working, the program needs to change, like, period. There is just no logical debate possible about that.
Yeah.
So, there should be changes. Specifically, what I'm saying with block periodization is the idea that, every 4 weeks, the whole program is completely revamped.
Yeah.
So my programs usually, it's the little things that I'm changing. For example, someone's chest may be stagnating, then I'm not changing what they're doing for the legs.
Yeah.
So you might also see that in the same individual, their legs might still be on a very lower training frequency, but their chest is already a lot more advanced. They've been training chest and biceps, mirror muscles for 2 years longer than their legs. And then their bench press program, for example, if they're a powerlifter, will be a lot different than what they're doing for their squat. And you'd also see more variety there, etc. So there should definitely be changes.
Yeah.
Not just for psychological, but also for physiological reasons.
Yeah.
And psychology is a separate thing. And when someone, a client says that they're bored with it, then definitely, I think you, as a coach, you should change things up. I am more conservative, though. I generally steer people towards being consistent and just, sticking with what works, not trying to change things up just for the sake of changing things up. Really hammer down the value of routine and consistency, making, long-term progress until they really say, like, I'm really bored with this now, and then change it up. Or you change up what they are bored with. For example, some people just don't like a certain exercise. You change it. Yeah. But no reason to change up all the other stuff in the program.
Yeah. I think I can agree with that for sure. So like you mentioned stalls there. So when progress does stall, you say you have to change something up. So let's say you're already training everything 5 times a week. At that point, what do you change up the exercises? Do you increase the per session volume, or do you think it would be a good idea to maybe draw back on the frequency a little bit for a month or two, and then bump it back up again?
I want to change the frequency. Frequency probably stays the same or it goes up unless something like in their lifestyle changes. For example, if they get a new job which is more stressful, which impairs recovery capacity, then their optimal frequency might go down. But barring something like that, I wouldn't use a decreased frequency as a means to break the plateau. I'd use, for example, more training volume, more variety in the exercise selection, more complex periodization model, like triple undulation periodization compared to what they were doing before, or just different exercises altogether. If I think that the program is still solid and just it's this exercise specifically that they are just, they've basically maxed out on it. Sometimes literally, if it's the machine that cannot carry more weight. But I wouldn't use frequency as a means to break a plateau.
Okay, good.
Or at least not a reduced frequency.
Right. So I guess like that's probably our fundamental disagreement here, because I think that in my case that is exactly what I would do, because I think there would come a point where you just can't increase the per session training volume anymore. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you can switch up the exercises too. I mean, especially the assistance exercises. Like, I think it's good to have a core of main movements that you kind of stick to always for the most part. And then the others you can kind of swap in and out according to preferences or timing or whatever. But I think that once you reach a certain cap of per session training volume where you can no longer recover in a day or two, then I think the best thing to do would be to reduce the training frequency and then increase the per session training volume. But it's probably not I don't know, I don't want to say significant disagreement, but maybe, I mean, I can understand perhaps you value the research or the data that we have on frequency maybe a little more than I do. But I think that, we've seen in the frequency literature that the novelty factor, or when you do increase frequency, that shows a positive effect. So it would make sense if you're already maxed out in terms of frequency, then it would make sense to reduce it for a little while, increase the per session training volume, increase the frequency again, keep getting more gains, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd say that when you've really reached that point, which is like years of training, you're basically maxed out on frequency and training volume as at that point, hopefully a very elite level trainee. Then I'd say realistically, and I think I'm there too, realistically, where you're at is just your genetic limitations. And then nothing you do is actually going to get you a lot more jacked.
Yeah.
So,
except gear.
Yeah. So exactly. So I think then you are just all the changes you make at that point are fine-tuning the nervous system. And I'm actually not entirely convinced that there is such a thing as a natty max, because we don't know if it's like a hard limit or if gains just slow down very, very, very significantly. Because I think it was last year I documented my progress in the most meticulous manner I've ever done, with weight and everything, and I was really sure to have like the exact same life circumstances for 2 weeks, exact same diet, everything. And I concluded that year I gained 1 pound of muscle. And I was like, I was actually quite glad with that, because, I was still making progress. Based on the absolute best, most meticulous measurement I could make, I made progress that year. And for me now, any progress really is... I'm happy with that.
Well, I think since 2012, I competed in the Canadian Nationals, drug-tested nationals. And since then, every year I've been exactly the same stage weight, which is a little bit depressing. I do think my look has gotten a little bit better. Like it looks a little bit harder, more mature. But in terms of actual muscularity, it's just been diminishing returns.
Yeah.
But that's the reality as a natural bodybuilder. I don't think that that's any reason to be fatalistic about your programming or training, though. Like, I'm here, I might as well just not even do anything. Like, I might as well just, maintain at this point. I mean, I think that results can be made, like you said. I mean, even 1 pound in a year sounds like not much, but 1 pound of muscle on stage is, it's a good chunk of meat. Like, it could make a difference in your physique. So,
if I'm 5 pounds heavier in 5 years, I'll be ecstatic.
Yeah, me too, for sure. I'm curious, Menno, how long have you been training? About?
For 14 years,
okay.
I think.
Yeah, so a little longer than myself. So, yeah, that sounds about right. And then the other question I would have is, throughout the course of that year, were you eating in a very small surplus, or how did your diet look throughout that year?
That year, I basically did like one really long build period followed by one really long cut period. Kind of traditional bodybuilding type programming.
Did you say a long bulk followed by a short cut, or?
The cut was shorter than the bulk, but it was still, I think it was something like 8 months bulk, 4 months cut, something like that.
Okay, all right, cool. Okay, and then
and
then at the end of the 4 month cut or whatever it was, you measured your muscle mass, and it was 1 pound more than at the beginning. And was there any difference in fat mass, or like were you just?
Yeah, basically I used the tape, caliper measurements, scale. Basically 2 weeks at my absolute best estimate of maintenance calories. Calculated the 2 week average. Even measured all my gym clothing in weight. I used gym weight and morning fasted weight, and average everything out. And then it was 1 pound difference at the exact same caliper measurements across like 7 sites.
Oh wow, cool. That's really interesting. I should run an experiment like that on myself sometime. So I don't know. We can blast through this really quickly, and then we can touch on the whole nutrient timing thing, which I know is another thing that you're pretty big on. So yeah, I did this video where I kind of defended the stuff I've sort of been talking about here, where I think that, you know, body part splits can have their place, especially if you structure them in the way I've been describing. And the first reason I think that it's a good idea is that people tend to enjoy them more, at least in my experience and in conversations with my athletes, my friends, and just other bodybuilders, even at the very elite level. They just tend to find it more fun when you can go in and get a pump and just blast any body part rather than, you know, do one exercise per body part. Do you think that that's a significant enough factor to...
I think that's really highly subjective.
Yeah.
Really comes down to what kind of people you ask, because my kind of programming is really different. I realize that. So a lot of people, also a lot of my clients, they come in and they're skeptical when I first give them the program, and it takes a while to get used to that kind of programming, and then they often like it.
Yeah.
I don't think we have any literature on enjoyability in strength athletes of different training frequencies. But I would say that if you just look at the factors that govern motivation, there might actually be benefits to higher training frequencies as well, because you get more variety every session, and you're stronger in all the lifts you're doing. If you're doing a fly on a separate day, you're going to lift more weight than on a different day, and I think most people will enjoy that. Also, assuming you do indeed make more progress, I think progress in itself is the most motivating thing that someone can have in the program.
Yeah.
So that would also be good. But yeah, I mean, psychologically, I think it just differs, and it can very well be a reason for someone to do a body part split simply because they enjoy that a whole lot more than full body training.
Yeah. So let's just take that as an example. So you have someone who says, I really like body part splits, and I find hitting every muscle just doing one exercise 5 times a week, I just find that kind of boring. What do you do for that person?
First thing is, I never take what my clients say at face value. This might suck if you're considering becoming a client, but it's actually crucial to my methods.
Yeah.
I first need to make sure that that person has actually tried both, given both a very honest try.
Yeah.
And also, you know, in the right kind of programming setup, because, for example, keto diets, which is really notorious in this regard. I cannot recall how many people have told me, you know, I can never do keto diets. Keto diets really suck. And then I'm like, have you tried it? And either they just flat out haven't, or they say, yeah, I tried it and I felt horrible for 2 days and then I quit. And, you know, if you haven't gone through that adaptation period, which for a ketogenic diet is really significant, but you can make the argument that for any type of program, you know, any lifestyle change, you need to give it like 1 or 2 weeks before you can call it like a somewhat honest try. So that's like the first thing. But assuming they have tried both, I will probably try to find a middle ground. If they say they want to blast a body part like what you talked about, if they want one day where they really blast the hell out of that body part and then supplement it with, for example, blood flow restriction throughout the rest of the week, so that you sneakily still get in a higher training frequency, but they still get these benefits of really annihilating one body part on leg days, for example.
Right. Yeah. No, okay. I think that sounds reasonable. One of the criticisms I've heard of this is that, well, if you're dealing with elite level athletes, then enjoyment shouldn't be really on the table anymore. You should just do what is going to be best for your results. And elite athletes won't really worry about the fun factor anyway.
I think that's bunk.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, so all right, we agree on that. Because even if you're an elite, I mean, you've been training for 14 years. I mean, you still want to enjoy your training, and I think you're still gonna tend to push yourself a little bit harder if you're looking forward to it. If you're like, oh shit, I got to go to the gym now, like this. And I've been there. I've done training programs that I've absolutely hated just because, you know, they were probably what was best for me at the time. But in retrospect, I think I always push myself a little bit more on something that I can look forward to doing.
Yeah, for sure. And that varies substantially. A lot of my clients are perfectly happy, you know, to spend 6 months on at least a similar setup. You know, small things change, and at the end of the 6 months, actually the program has changed quite considerably.
Yeah.
But, you know, very roughly, only like little things have changed over the 6 months. And other clients just say, you know, 4 weeks is just absolutely the maximum I can give. And a great example from that is Sigvar Garfors. It's a client of mine that became national powerlifting champion in Norway. And he has really an all or nothing kind of mindset. When it comes, he's like extremely dedicated. He did, when he became national powerlifting champion, he had a column clean saying to make weight. That's how dedicated he is.
Okay.
So, and that's actually that's actually one of my secrets to make powerlifters and stuff make weight. It's serious. If you think about it, there is absolutely no performance detriment, and you can lose 4 pounds or something quite easily. But okay, he's super dedicated, but he just needs the variety and the program changes. So, he can achieve greatness when you allow him to do the stuff that he is motivated for.
Right.
But if I would just force him to, this is optimal, you got to do this, then I am absolutely confident he would not have been national powerlifting champion.
Right. Yeah.
Because you just cannot ignore psychology.
Yeah. Okay. So the other point that I made was that the body part split tends to lead to better pumps. It's not the strongest case that I've ever made, but I'd appreciate if maybe you could comment on that.
Sure. Yeah. It's a given that if you do more volume within a given training session for any body part, you'll get a better pump for sure.
Yeah.
But the question is, of course, other than the fact that you enjoy a pump, and the question is if you enjoy that pump more than 7 smaller pumps, for example, because I get especially when I'm lean, I just need to pick up a dumbbell to get a sick pump basically in my arms.
Okay.
So I'm hugely vascular at low body fat percentages, especially in my arms. So I don't need to do a lot of volume to get a great pump. But other than that, the question is, of course, if other than psychological factors, there's actually any physiological benefit to having a pump. And it's kind of interesting because it's basically bodybuilders started about the pump as, Arnold Schwarzenegger was like, it's better than coming. And purely based on feeling, you feel that the muscle is growing. That's what it feels like, right? And you can see it. So that's basically all the rationale that bodybuilders used to have. And then basically came the science, and it showed these things are unrelated. It's just build up of metabolic stress and lactate accumulation, blood flow, all that stuff. And it's not really relevant to directly relevant, at least, to the muscle hypertrophy process. Then this basically caused another shift in the evidence-based industry when Brad Schoenfeld came in and he published his work on metabolic stress. And then all the bros were like, see, I told you so. That's, the science we've been waiting for and we have intuitively known for all these decades, showing that you need that pump to get great gains.
Yeah.
However, if you actually look at all the claims for metabolic stress, then I'd say that is really, there is almost no relation, because if you look at the pump hypothesis, basically metabolic stress, what it predicted, optimal time under tension, because there is, an optimal time under tension to get you the best pumps, doesn't exist based on most research. Rest intervals. Shorter rest to get bigger pump, higher metabolic stress. Not true. I wrote a review paper on that, also with Brad Schoenfeld, and a new study actually showing that, if anything, there are significant benefits for muscle hypertrophy to resting longer between your sets, simply because you can do more work. So it's definitely not the case that shorter rest means higher pump means more growth. If you look at reps per set, used to say, bodybuilders said 8 to 12 reps per set. That's the range where you get great pumps. Actually, you could probably go higher. I think most bodybuilders actually use more like sets of 15 or something.
Yeah.
If you look at programs on Simply Shredded, for example, almost everyone does sets of 15.
Yeah.
But also, research shows not true. You can, with heavy weights, provided that volume is equated, you can get just as much hypertrophy or even more. So again, no need for metabolic stress. You get blood flow restriction training, there definitely the case. When the intensity is just not high enough for traditional kind of training to maximize hypertrophy, then the addition of metabolic stress can certainly basically compensate for the lack of mechanical tension to maximize hypertrophy. And most research shows that you can still at least come close to maximizing hypertrophy. However, not a single study to my knowledge has actually found that, given a similar program, any program with blood flow restriction results in greater gains than simple traditional high intensity training, which means that, mechanical tension is most likely more important than metabolic stress, and metabolic stress has a potentially redundant add-on role. Let's see what else. Oh, yes, range of motion. You get the sickest pumps if you use partial range of motion training and keep the tension on the muscle, basically. Most striking example of this, most research shows, I think most people know that full range of motion training is actually superior in most cases to using partials. But if you look at the most striking research here, which is, I think, the bench press, where at the top of the bench press there's very little resistance, or there is a big gap between strength resistance curves. So you can produce a lot of force, but a lot more than you can bench in the bottom position, which means that the weight feels relatively light at the top. However, 2 studies have been done on this, showing consistently that I think they both measured strength. Not sure if one of them also measured hypertrophy, but they show that strength gains at least are about 16 to 70% greater consistently when you are performing that last bit of range of motion as well, even when you compare full range of motion training to another group that does 2 sets for every 1 set of full range of motion training, 1 set with the bottom range of motion and 1 set with the top range of motion. And the most striking thing there is that if you separate these parts of the range of motion, in the top you can actually move a lot more weight. So the total training load in the partial training group is actually a lot higher because you use a lot more weight because the top is easier. So even in that scenario, it seems that full range of motion training, which does not give nearly as much pump, is superior.
Right. So
basically for metabolic stress, I'd say that it was a great idea, didn't live up to the evidence.
Right. So I mean, like, sure, I of course willing to grant that mechanical tension is a more significant factor than metabolic stress, but I don't think that implies that metabolic stress has no impact whatsoever. Like I think it's worth considering as a small factor. I don't think it would trump mechanical tension, and then your other example, I don't think it would trump range of motion, but I don't think that means we should throw it off the table altogether. So in my case, I think that, as another reason why bro splits might be effective for some people, I think it's worth considering. And even if we just ignore the physiological benefits, which are admittedly small, then like you said, the psychological impact. I mean, Arnold even said himself, right? So I don't take that too seriously, but I definitely that was interesting about the range of motion, especially when you consider doubling the number of sets for the top end range of motion, and then that still being inferior. So full range of motion is clearly a very important factor. So go ahead.
On that topic, I have I fully agree with you about the psychological aspect. There are a few supplements, for example, citrulline, for example, that I think will increase your pumps, and you have like these no explode, arginine kind of things that I'm actually not sure if they increase your pumps. Seems to in some individuals, but some of my clients they just say, I want something that increases my pumps, and I say, well, it's not going to answer performance. It's probably not going to answer gains at all, but it's worth trying if you just want to get better pumps. And they're like, okay, cool, and they find that they get better pumps. They use the supplement purely for that reason. So
yeah. And then the last reason was that it allows better prioritization of arms. So I believe you've alluded to this before in this discussion, that when you hit something fresh at the beginning of a workout, you tend to perform better on that given movement. So in corroboration with this, I've found that when I hit, say, a full body workout and then I do arms, my arm sessions just suck. So what I found in switching to more of a body part type split, I've been able to prioritize my arms by giving them their own day, so I can kind of hit my biceps when they're fresh, and then the same thing goes for the triceps. So what would you have to say about that?
I'd say you can still, there's nothing wrong inherently with starting your workout with barbell curls.
Yeah.
In practice, often you end up with a compound exercise, but one of the most important factors for exercise order is simply the priority that something has. If your arms are really lagging, then I would definitely see merit to starting your workouts with, like you said, close grip bench presses, for example, or overhead triceps extensions, and barbell curls, or I like to use Bayesian curls a lot. Start your workout with that. You can absolutely do that. As for dedicated arms days, I think a lot of people are prone to overtraining or at least overdoing it on their arms, because men at least are just for chest and arms, it's like the body parts. If you look at their programs, and even when they flat out tell you, like, this program has equal volume for legs and upper body, and you just do the math and you see it's not nearly optimal. And if you look at most programs with an arm day, and go to Simply Shredded, for example, and just tally up volume however you want to calculate it for different body parts, I can guarantee you'll see arms and chest having a lot more volume than hamstrings, for example. Even though hamstrings are arguably, for a bodybuilder, one of the most important muscles. Hamstring definition, hamstring striation especially, is something that gets you top of points in bodybuilding contests.
Yeah.
But I think arms day often result in overdoing it on the volume for arms. And 2 studies have actually been done on adding arm isolation work to compound exercises. Both found no significant benefits for muscle hypertrophy or strength, one in advanced trainees and one in untrained individuals. I would definitely not say that all you need is compound exercises, and there was a trend for greater gains, I'd say, in these studies with the arm training, but it does definitely show that the biceps curls and stuff, they are the icing on the cake, basically, compared to just getting really strong at chin-ups and stuff. So it's very rare that I have an actual arm day. Although one of the benefits that an arm day might actually work is that you actually increase volume and training frequency. For example, you'll see that certain bodybuilders, compared to their legs, like the hamstrings, like I talked about, their arms, they train them with a higher training frequency, which might actually be the reason why they get the impression that it's the arms day that's working, but really it's just the frequency and the volume that's making their arms progress better than their hamstrings.
Yeah. So one of the things that I had considered when I was sort of designing this for myself was just doing, say, like a push-pull legs, and then putting the arm work on the beginning of the pull day, or say the bicep work at the beginning of the pull day, and the tricep work at the beginning of the push day, just as an example. Or we could do like you said, and just put it at the beginning of whatever workout. But then the obvious downside of that would be that the subsequent back work might suffer as a result of the biceps being fatigued, which seemed suboptimal to me. So then that was my rationale for putting the arms on its own day, because they are what I believe to be a glaring weak point in my physique. When I first started training, I was training for basketball, so I did a lot of lower body work, didn't really care about aesthetics or my arms too much, which is atypical in the community, but I really didn't train them much. And then I never really honestly enjoyed training my arms. I just felt it to be like uncomfortable, and then I never saw much progress. But when I do put them on their own day, it's like it solidifies in my mind, okay, this is really what I got to go in and do. Just have to, blast my biceps for a half an hour or whatever. And that was a way for me to kind of get that work done without compromising, the subsequent work, like I said. So that was sort of my rationale for doing that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that can work perfectly fine. Like I said, if that's the way for you to incorporate a sufficient volume and frequency and motivated you for that, and especially if, for example, you're comparing a program with 4 days a week where the arm training is included versus 5 days a week where arms get their own day, then I think, definitely, then the arm day can be positive.
Yeah, I think it would be different if you had Monday chest, Tuesday back, Wednesday legs, Thursday shoulders, Friday arm. That's quite a bit different in structure than what we've been talking about. So I think we can agree there. So how does training frequency tie in with the timing of nutrients around the workout?
Yeah, it definitely ties in strongly with that. In the interest of time, I will refer to one of my latest presentations / article on my blog called Workout Nutrition Does Matter, High Frequency Bodybuilding and More. I think that's the title. Probably still on my front page on my website, pageofbodybuilding.com. But briefly, the idea is that as you get more advanced, like I was saying, then this anabolic window, which is really not this anabolic peephole that's like 1 and 2 hours before and after the workout, and then it closes and then it's gone. It starts basically as soon as fatigue accumulates within a muscle, and then it can last a very long time. In beginners, it can last over 72 hours, has been documented. And I think that a really hard training bodybuilder, based on frequency research, you would see that this anabolic window basically lasts all week, which is why we don't see the benefits of increasing the training frequency beyond 1 session a week in untrained individuals. And this window basically shortens. You become more resistant to muscle damage. Your recovery is faster, or at least you are more resistant to the same amount of fatigue. And that's why you get the benefits of higher training frequency. But you need to supplement that with workout nutrition, because the anabolic window is the time period where muscle growth occurs. Just as basically a harsh reality check. If you're an advanced trainee and it's your second rest day in a row, rest day in a row, you are not gaining muscle mass that day. I can almost guarantee it.
Yeah.
The actual, especially an elite level trainee, I think that why we gain so little muscle mass is because it is really just a few hours after the workout that you are really having a state of net positive protein balance. Basically, that you are actually accumulating new protein in your muscles. So with the if it fits your macros kind of crowd, what I call the nihilist bodybuilding crowd, is certain basically told themselves the fairy tale. You know, you go into the gym, you do heavy squats. Some people even think you do heavy squats and then your entire body grows for like the rest of the week. So, and then just look at the actual rates of muscle growth you see in these individuals and yourself. You know, just look at the weight and the mirror and the actual rates of muscle growth you're seeing. It is not the case that you are just growing nonstop. So yeah, I'd say that, you know, as an untrained individual and you are doing a heavy training session, then there is very little actual relevance for workout nutrition. And that's also what the literature shows. In untrained individuals, you know, provided that you have a realistic setting, you consume enough protein and stuff, you have whole meals, at least 3 a day, then it won't matter when, if you're consuming these workouts, you know, in the form of a shake that you slam down as soon as you hit the locker room, or you go home and you just have a full meal when you get hungry. However, as you get more advanced, and especially as you get to the elite level, which is also what a really nice study from Japan, I think, showed, that in advanced trainees, it does matter, and it becomes really a matter of hours. So I don't think you have to slam down a shake when you're at the locker room, but you do need to sandwich your workout sufficiently with meals. And how much you actually have to sandwich it depends on if they're mixed meals, you know, fiber content, fat content. If it's a whey shake, for example, many people have just a whey shake, and then actually research seems to indicate that there are significant benefits to having these protein pulses of whey a lot more frequently, and also becomes a lot more important to actually slam it down, like when you hit the locker room. In the context of full meals, I don't have many of my clients actually consume shakes post-workout, actually very few. Just make sure that in their lifestyle they sandwich their workout sufficiently with the meals.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm currently of the opinion that it's not going to hurt to slam a shake, especially if you're in your off season, you have plenty of calories to go around. So yeah, I mean, I've been fairly familiar with the research on this topic, and I think that I agree with you completely on that. I mean, I think that especially in advanced and elite level athletes, that window just becomes smaller and smaller, and so it becomes increasingly important to get some form of amino acids in within some window. And like you said, that window is going to depend on the pre-workout meal and lifestyle factors as well. But I think that all else being equal, I think it's like safe to just get a shake in after, and at least it allows you to be consistent with it. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I know you're not a very big daily protein guy, so maybe you might exceed your daily intake. The case could probably be made that your just total daily intake might get too high and it might be unnecessary. But in any other context, I think it's not at least not a bad idea, right? Yeah.
If it doesn't hurt, then for sure.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that I think that's basically exactly what Eric Helms' conclusion is about the topic. Like, I don't think he's really as convinced about the research as I am. You'd have to ask him. I can't speak for him, of course. But he just says, there might well be benefits. So just do it. It's not a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard Brad Schoenfeld, who I'm pretty sure co-authored that paper that caused all of the uprising in the IFYM crowd, like you said, with Alan Aragon, and I might be forgetting a couple others, but and I've heard him say in an interview that if you're your everyday gym goer who's just trying to stay healthy and improve their physique or whatever, then it's not going to make much of a difference. But if you're an elite level bodybuilder who's trying to get every last morsel of muscle, then it is prudent to get some sort of post workout nutrition in within a half an hour. I think was the time limit that he referenced.
Yeah, that's really funny because I said this in a previous interview, like I think especially Alan Aragon and Brad Schoenfeld have become sort of against their will. They are now heralded as the heroes of if it fits your macros.
Yeah.
And when someone says they are consuming a shake, they're like, bro, have you read anything at all by Alan Aragon or Brad Schoenfeld? Just do it. You have to read the research.
Yeah.
But Alan Aragon, to my knowledge, Brad Schoenfeld, Eric Helms, I think these are the guys that are most renowned for disproving that myth, debunking the workout nutrition myth. I think they all still, last time we talked at least, they all still consume shakes post-workout.
Right.
So discrepancy there between, questioning things in the scientific literature and the practical application that you still what you still actually recommend to people.
Right.
That's not always. You can question, like I said, or what you said, you can question the existence of any benefits of having that shake, but there might be benefits, and it's a low effort decision. So cost benefit, it's a good decision to consume the shake.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And that's a big difference between purely scientific, what I call nihilism. Just always having the standpoint that things don't matter until you have at least 3, randomized peer-reviewed studies showing that this is actually true.
Yeah.
And, just practical, logical, reasonable, practical advice.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, I think that's probably a good place to conclude this podcast, Menno. So
sure.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I think everyone's really going to appreciate your insights on these topics, and I'm happy to hear that we agree for the most part on the big important stuff.
Yeah,
so that's good.
Big picture, especially.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, hopefully we can collaborate again sometime in the future. There's plenty of other stuff that I'd love to chat with you about. But for now, we'll call that a day. So thank you very much, Menno, and thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of the Ice Cream for PRs podcast, and we will catch you in the next one.